Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns. Very excited to be here with you today to discuss something that's really, really important and something that is not on most people's radar screens, I believe, even though I'm going to read you a few headlines from a simple Google search that shows that it ought to be on many people's radars. And what I'm talking about is, really another pandemic or epidemic that we might call it, and that is the epidemic of loneliness. I'm going to switch to my other screen here. I don't think it'll affect anything on the video or the audio. Hopefully you can all still see and hear me. So I just typed in CDC loneliness. And of course, Amazon is the first thing that pops up. It says how to overcome loneliness. But after that, CDC.gov, health risks of social isolation and loneliness. CDC.gov, coping with loneliness, how right now. HHS.gov, new Surgeon General advisory raises alarm about the devastating impact of loneliness. NPR.org, America has a loneliness epidemic. Here are 6 steps to address it. LA Times, Surgeon General warns about loneliness. Isolations are an epidemic. I won't go on any more of them, but you can see how many, how much this is out there. And these are all from 2023. Every single one of those Google hits was from this year. This is not something that is old news. This is something that is current news. And the reason I was thinking about this and the reason that I decided to do that little Google search here is because I was putting together a lesson this morning for one of my clients who, this week in our 12-week program, which is usually about for everyone, it's usually around week 8 that I start talking about loving kindness, right? Now, loving kindness in the traditional form, as it's translated from a Buddhist concept, right? It comes from the concept of gentle friend, okay? Gentle friend meaning actually the gentle part of the gentle friend actually refers to what we would call a gentle rain, which is very soothing and nourishing, but also has an equanimity to it, right? It falls on everything all the same. And the friend part of gentle friend is also sort of connotating this equanimity of friendship, which is to say that when we are a friend to someone or when someone is a friend to us, that friend is there no matter what, right? Their friendship does not change, depending on the circumstantial, life aspects, right? In other words, when I'm at my lowest, my friend is there just like he or she is there when I'm at my highest, right? And as I was putting together this lesson, it occurred to me, and I talk about this all the time, and it just occurred to me for the first time that maybe there's a lot of people out there who don't have a friend like that. There's a lot of people who don't feel that way about one particular person or a small group of people. That friendship is there no matter what happens. And if you're one of those people, I'm talking to you today, okay? Because this is a very, very important aspect of our health, of our well-being, and of our ability to function in this life, right? We as mammals, we are required to have some sort of connection to others. Now, as you're listening to this, you might say, well, yeah, I don't have any friends. As I said, if that's you, I'm talking to you because that's me too, right? I don't have any real, true friends in my life at this point in my life who I can, who are there no matter what. And I have not had that in the continuity of my life either. Right. But yet I am as healthy now as, healthier now than I have been at any point in my life. And that's not just physical health. That's also emotional health and mental health, which are things that suffer in loneliness. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about, right? That loneliness is not about being or it's not about being alone. And the the antidote to loneliness is not about having a lot of people around you. You may have heard the term lonely in a crowd of people before, because it is possible to feel lonely even in a crowd of people. Because loneliness, or the the antidote for loneliness, and loneliness itself is all about a connection, or a lack of connection, or more specifically, the lack of the potential for connection. And that is something we can work with, right? And working with this is essential, again, to our health and our well-being. When we feel isolated, we feel afraid. There's no way around that, right? And that's not to say, like, on the sort of conscious and emotional even level of fear, right? Because I mean, I can be alone and not feel afraid in terms of, like, like fear for my health or my safety, right? It's not that, right? Like, I feel perfectly secure. Even, I mean, you could think of a really rich person living like a Citizen Kane kind of thing, right? Where they have everything they could possibly need, and they're completely safe and completely, surrounded by the security of their belongings and their home and their alarm systems and their security, whatever other security apparatus they might have, right? But yet there's an emptiness in there, right? And without that unconscious connection to others, then there is a feeling of danger, a feeling of exposed, of a sort of a negative aspect of vulnerability, if you will. And again, this exists far, far, far outside of our conscious understanding, right? It's a nervous system status, if you will. And speaking of the nervous system, right, isolation promotes stress. No question about it. This is why our ancestors 200,000 years ago, formed themselves into tribes of people, because they knew that being isolated was dangerous, but being connected was safe. And so again, it's not about, running out and getting lots of, sort of superficial friends who, and again, those friends, are they true friends, right? Are the superficial friends of our lives, as we often refer to them as, the fair weather friends of our lives, right? Are they going to be there when times are tough? Are they going to be with me when I'm at my ugliest and most, undesirable state? Are they still going to be standing with me? Or are they making excuses to not be around? And are they, leaving and leaving me isolated? Well, unfortunately, or the reality is for many people that, yeah, that's true. It's the latter. It's not the former. And so again, this is something that we can do something about, right? Because when we feel that stress of isolation, well, before I get to what we can do about it, that stress of isolation, as many of you know, I don't work from a script here, but I do have some notes that I'm trying to refer to, and it's not working very well. I have a hard time dividing my attention here, but let's talk about the stress aspect of this for a second, okay? So the stress that we feel in isolation, right? And again, it's not necessarily, stress has many different forms, as we know, right? Depression is a form of stress. It's a form of what we call hypo alerts or hypo arousal, which is to say that we have, negative energy. We have low levels of arousal. But that's just as much a stress response as hyperarousal, which is anxiety and jitteries and like that sort of jittery feeling of stress, right? With the blood pressure and everything else, right? And so that hypoarousal, which is again a form of stress, or whether it's hypo or hyper, it doesn't really matter. The point is that when we are isolated, we are going to tend to experience some level of that stress, whether it's the hyper arousal of stress or the hypo arousal of stress. But here's the thing, right? As we experience that stress, and the suffering that comes with it, because in the stress, we're going to feel it in our bodies. Again, either hyper or hypo. We're going to feel it in the body. We're going to experience emotions, associated with that feeling. And the thoughts and the story of our mind is going to promote more of the same. And so we get stuck in this cycle. And this cycle, do you know what it does? One of the most, powerful things that it does? It makes us feel more isolated. And then in that isolation, we experience more of that stress, which then makes us feel even more isolated. And this becomes really a feedback loop that sometimes never ends. And we become accustomed to it, and we become sort of calloused to the feelings that we're experiencing in this isolation. And then it just feels normal. And then there are maladaptive coping mechanisms that we might turn to where, perhaps we're overeating, perhaps we're indulging in alcohol or other recreational drugs or caffeine or nicotine. And we're overindulging in these things, or we're overindulging in our work. We're working extra shifts. We're taking our work home with us, and we're isolating ourselves and sort of buttressing ourselves within the work, which is no different from buttressing yourself from within alcohol abuse. It's the same thing. It's a coping mechanism. But it's what we call a maladaptive coping mechanism, because in the end, this coping mechanism, while it does feel like a relief to the stress, it's really causing more stress, and it's causing more damage than the original stress itself. And again, the end result of this is that we feel more and more and more isolated, more and more lonely. Now, again, here's the thing, right? As I'm telling you, I grew up like this, right? I have a very, it varies, I think, between like an anxious attachment style and an ambiguous attachment style, right? That the way I was brought up was, as many of you know, I've shared this a lot on my podcast here, that, I grew up in a very difficult home. I had a very difficult relationship with my mother and an even more difficult relationship with my father. And they had a combined difficult relationship, which made the whole experience very difficult for me and my two sisters, who were both younger than me, both considerably younger than me. And they were very close in age, so they were not as isolated because they had each other. They shared a room. They were only a year and a half apart from one another, so less than a year and a half apart from one another. And so they were, they were able to find that connection even within the chaos of the home environment that we grew up in. I did not have that luxury. So I was very isolated from even like my earliest memories. I felt isolated and I felt alone. And to the point where I feel comfortable now being alone, right? It's like it's easier for me to just be alone than to be in social circumstances and stuff, which again is not, that's not the point, right? It's not about not being alone. It's about finding a way to feel connected. Okay, and these are two very different concepts and very important. It's a very important distinction that we need to make between the two. We need to discern between, just pushing ourselves into an awkward and uncomfortable social situation, which is going to cause us stress and make us feel isolated even within that social circumstance, and discerning between that and just the ability to feel connected. Because I will tell you, dear friends, here, right now, that I feel supremely connected. I'm still basically a hermit. I do not have a social life where I go out just to go out and have friends and go hang out with friends. But I feel connected. I feel connected to everyone. I feel connected to you who are listening to this right now. And we will perhaps never meet in our whole lives. But when I scroll through the analytics on Spotify, or I look at the different people who are, subscribing and liking and commenting on the videos on YouTube, even though it's not a ton of people out there. It's this, I feel connection when I see these numbers, because every one of these numbers represents an actual person out there. And as I told you before, the other day, on Spotify, I know where all of you. I mean, I don't know specifically where you as an individual live, and I don't know anybody's addresses or anything like that. But I know that certain percentages of you are in Great Britain, and certain percentage of you are in Brazil, and Germany, and Israel, and Australia, and Canada. And the U.S., of course. I mean, not of course, but that's where I am. So, I mean, like 60% of you are in the U.S., but a significant portion of you are not. And I feel that connection, even though you're thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away. I have no idea your name. I have no idea what you look like. I have no idea, what you're all about, how old you are, what you do for a living, any of that. I don't know any of it, but yet I'm able to feel a connection. And that is because the connection has nothing to do with you or me as individuals. It has to do with the way that I process your presence in the world. And that is true also for the people who I, see walking their dogs as I walk to the supermarket, the people who I talk to at the supermarket, the people, whether they're customers or employees of the supermarket, the way that I feel my heart is open to the connection of all of these people. Now, does that mean that I make this, amazing connection to every single person in the world? Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that. But what it means is that I'm open to that connection. And it is that openness which tempers and alleviates the stress on my body, whether it's hyper arousal or hypo arousal. It's relieved in that sense of the openness to the connection, to the cultivation of that potential of connection. That's where the magic is. It's not at all about having, double-digit friends and all people who are, messaging you all day and all that kind of stuff. It has nothing to do with that. Now, if that's where you feel comfortable, hey, nobody's saying there's anything wrong with that either, right? But I know for me, and that's the way I used to live, but for me, that is like torture. Because in a way, though, having all those different people around actually makes me feel more isolated, again, because of the stress that I'm feeling. And then I start feeling, why can't I be comfortable in these situations? Why do I hate small talk so much? Why is this so hard for me? Isolated with each one of those questions. And so the answer here, not another question, but the answer is about cultivating this openness to the connections. That's where the health comes from. That's because, again, we don't live in a time right now where we need the tribalism. 200,000 years ago, your ancestors and my ancestors needed that the actual physical connection to people, in proximity, because that's what saved us. That's what enabled us to hunt down woolly mammoths and feed ourselves and keep ourselves safe from the predators and the, saber-toothed tigers. But we don't live in a world like that anymore. We live in a world right now where you can literally be at home and get everything you need delivered to your doorstep. And you don't even have to touch paper money, right? There's no need for connection anymore in our lives. And so that's fine. We can adapt to that, right? We don't need to make connections if they're not needed. But that sense of openness to connection, that feeling that we matter to someone else and that someone else matters to us, that has never gone away. But that is what the CDC and the Surgeon General are warning us against in all those headlines. And again, that's just a quick Google search, the top 5 or 6 things I read to you. This is deep. And it's been happening for decades. It's been slowly creeping towards this place for decades. And it is at the point of emergency. And depending on our way of life, right, this is either exacerbated or relieved a little bit, but it's one or the other usually, right? And so, like, for instance, first responders, right? I'm doing a workshop for first responders starting next week, but these folks, I mean, there's nobody who can relate to what they do except other first responders, right? There's no way that you and I could even imagine to know what these people are going through every day, day in and day out. And so therefore they have a conscious understanding that not everybody understands them. Not everybody can connect to them. Not everybody can feel what they go through. Imagine how isolating that feels. And so the beautiful thing here is that this is just a skill. The ability to feel connection is a skill. And it's a skill which I have cultivated for myself in spite of my ambiguous and anxious attachment style that I grew up with in my life. In spite of the fact that I don't have any long-standing friends, and I've never been someone who has cultivated those deep friendships with anyone. In spite of the fact that my marriage is coming to an end. In spite of the fact that my children and I are having a hard time relating to each other at this particular time in their lives and my lives and the separation and everything else that's going on, right? In spite of all of that, I feel more connected and more healthy and more well than I have ever felt at any time in my entire 54-year life. And that's the truth. That's because I practice making that connection. And again, not making it in the sense of like going out and finding people, but opening my heart, building the skill of opening my heart to that connection, which includes connecting back to myself. That's the first connection we got to make. And in so many of us, that connection has been lost for a long time. And it's the last thing that we think about, reconnecting to. We get into Netflix, or we get into sports, or we go out with our friends, and we get, have some drinks, we get into workaholism, we do all that stuff to mask this emptiness that we're feeling. But that emptiness starts with a sense of connection to ourselves. And then unfolds into a sense of connection for those around us. And from then, and not just the people around us, but the actual world around us, like the whole thing, right? We can sense our place in it. Even if we're just sitting alone in our basement office, recording YouTube videos and podcasts and watching reruns of Better Call Saul, when we have downtime, we're still able to cultivate that sense of connection. So the practices are super simple, folks. Like super simple, like so simple you won't even believe it. And I'd be happy to teach them to you. Really, I would. And seriously, I mean, I would send you the instructions. If that's what you want, just want the instructions, here you go, do the practice. Let me know how it works out. You don't have to necessarily pay me to do this for you, right? I'll send you the practices for nothing. But for most of us, it's not, for everyone, it's going to take a commitment to those practices, which is sometimes hard to do because of the stress and the isolation and the workaholism and all the stuff that I've been talking about. It's hard to break out of this cycle. It's hard to get out of the rut. But if you look at it in very simplistic terms, that just doing this one thing a couple of times a day for the next few weeks and just remain open to that process and remain committed to that process, well, pretty soon, just like everybody who I ever do coach comes back to me, you will too, and you'll say, I had no idea I could live this way. One of the practices that I'm talking about using is where we imagine people from our lives. We imagine someone who's very positive for us, like somebody who we love a lot. We imagine someone who's neutral, someone we don't really know, like a clerk in a store or the letter carrier of our neighborhood we've never met. And then we imagine someone who's, difficult for us. We never go to the abuser or the really hard person. We work with the person who was, talking during the movie, that kind of thing, right? And what we do is we systematically, do a certain process with all three of these people. It takes 5 minutes or so a day. I promise you, it's not hard. But like every single person that almost every single person I've taught that practice to has come back after a few weeks and said, I don't have anybody left for that third person. I can't do this practice anymore, Art, because there's nobody I can think of that makes me feel bothered or resentful. I can't find anybody for that negative person. There's no negative people left in my life. The people didn't change, right? They didn't do the practices. You changed. You're the one that gets to change, and you're the one that gets to perceive people in a different way, which then again cuts down that feeling of isolation and replaces it with a feeling of deep and beautiful connection, which then lets the stress recede and lets us now live our lives in a different way that doesn't include the same levels of stress. This is one of the key aspects to stress reduction through mindfulness practices. And I would love a chance to teach you some of this. So whether you just want the instructions to the practice or you want to talk about coaching or anything in between, I encourage you to get in touch with me. art@artburnscoaching.com. It's that simple. All right. And you can even just put in the subject line, send me the practice, and I will just send you the practice. We don't ever have to communicate with each other. But you got to take the first step. You got to tell me that you want it, because I don't know you want it if you don't tell me. All right? All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this one today. I feel like my energy's a little different today. I didn't sleep too much last night, and I'm trying not to over-caffeinate myself as a result. So I feel like I'm, moving a little more slowly and not quite as, as sharp as I normally am. But I hope my message came through anyway. And I'll be back soon. If not tomorrow, then very soon after, to talk more about these wonderful practices and the wonderful impacts that the practices can have on us, especially as it relates to our chronic stress. All right, everybody. I hope you well. I wish you well. I hope you have a great day. And thanks again for listening, and thanks again for watching. And please know that I do feel that connection with every single one of you. Even though I'll never meet you in our lives, I still feel that connection to you. And that's really special for me. And I hope someday you can feel that too. All right, everybody. And not necessarily just for me, but for everyone in your life. I want that for you. All right. So let me know. I'll be back soon. Take care.